I saw something last winter that still keeps me up at night, a terrifying recording. The fear in the eyes of that poor boy, I can't get that out of my mind. The way his excited voice turned to screaming in seconds, the massive hand that reached into the frame, the sounds that came after the phone dropped, dragging, breathing, something that wasn't human. That footage is burned into my memory. Every frame, every terrible second. I watched a young man die on a cracked phone screen in the middle of nowhere, and the thing that killed him was something that shouldn't exist. Something that's still out there in those mountains, still hunting, still waiting. I'm a private investigator, been doing this work for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of things that would make most people uncomfortable. Cheating spouses, insurance fraud, corporate espionage, things that reveal the ugly side of human nature. But what I found in those mountains last winter, what I experienced out there in the wilderness, changed everything I thought I knew about the world. It shattered my understanding of what's possible, what's real, what lurks in the dark places we tell ourselves are empty. I need to tell this story before it eats me alive from the inside. The family who hired me deserves to know the truth, even if the police won't believe it, even if no one believes it. This isn't about being believed anymore. This is about getting it out, sharing the burden, warning others. Because what happened in those mountains could happen again, probably will happen again. Last winter, a young man in his early 20s went missing in the Cascade Mountain Range in Washington State. His name doesn't matter. The family asked me not to use it, and I'm respecting that wish. What matters is who he was. This wasn't just any hiker who got lost. This was someone who lived for adrenaline, who chased danger like other people chase money or love rock climbing, base jumping, parkour, free solo climbing. The kind of person who was always pushing boundaries, always seeking the next thrill that would make his heart pound and his blood sing. According to everyone who knew him, he was the type who would climb a cliff face just to see if he could. The type who would jump off a bridge with nothing but a parachute and a prayer. His social media was full of videos and photos of him doing things that made my palms sweat just looking at them. Hanging off rock faces by his fingertips, leaping between buildings, always grinning, always fearless, or at least appearing fearless. The family reached out to me after the police investigation seemed to be moving at a crawl. He was supposed to check in with his parents after a 3-day solo hiking trip in the Cascades. When he didn't call at the appointed time, they immediately knew something was wrong. He was always reliable about contact, always called when he said he would. It was one of his few consistent habits, a small concession to the parents who worried about his dangerous hobbies. The police opened a missing persons case, started a search operation. But the Cascade Range is vast, thousands of square miles of dense forest, steep mountains, deep ravines. The search area was enormous, and the weather that week was terrible. Heavy snow, high winds. Search teams could only cover so much ground, and after 48 hours, they'd found nothing. Not a trace of him. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. The family was frustrated with the pace of the official investigation. They felt like the police had given up too quickly, that not enough resources were being devoted to finding their son. So they hired me. I met with them in their home, a modest house in a quiet suburb. The mother's eyes were red from crying. The father looked like he hadn't slept in days. They showed me photos of their son, told me stories about his life, his dreams, his adventures. They were devout Christians who needed to find the body for a proper burial. That's what they told me, and I could see in their eyes that they'd already accepted the worst. They weren't holding out hope that I'd find him alive. They just wanted to bring him home, to lay him to rest according to their faith. They needed that closure, that final goodbye. What they didn't tell me right away, what I had to dig up myself, was the history of that area. Over a dozen hikers had vanished in those mountains over the past 20 years. Most were never found. Some cases, they found scattered remains months or years later. Other cases, nothing. Just people who walked into the forest and never walked out. The cases always went cold eventually, always. When I started looking into the pattern, cross-referencing the missing persons reports, plotting them on a map, I felt my skin crawl. The disappearances clustered in a specific region of the Cascades, not random across the range, but concentrated in one area, like something was hunting in a defined territory. I should have walked away right then, should have told the family I couldn't help them, recommended another investigator, but I needed the money. I'd had a slow month and my rent was due. So I took the job anyway. I told myself I could handle it, that I'd been in tough situations before. I had no idea what I was walking into. I drove up to the mountain region on a gray Tuesday morning in late February. The drive took 6 hours from my office, winding through increasingly remote roads until I reached the nearest town to the search area. The place was tiny, maybe 200 people living there year-round, plus seasonal tourists in summer who came for hiking and fishing. I checked into a small motel on the edge of town, the kind of place with stained carpets and a flickering neon sign, but clean enough and cheap. The woman at the front desk looked at me with obvious curiosity when I signed in. By the time I'd unpacked my bag and come back down, I got the sense that everyone in town already knew why I was there. Small towns are like that. News travels fast, especially news about outsiders poking around, asking questions about missing hikers. I spent the first day methodically working through a list of people to interview: park rangers at the local station, other hikers who'd been in the area recently, the owner of the outdoor supply store who sold gear to people heading into the mountains, a bartender at the only tavern in town who heard all the local gossip. Most people were tight-lipped, nervous about discussing the disappearances. They'd answer my questions with short sentences and avoid eye contact, give me bare minimum information, and then find an excuse to end the conversation. I've been doing this work long enough to recognize when people were hiding something, when they knew more than they were saying. I could tell they were scared of something, but no one would say what. A few people warned me to be careful up there, to stick to the marked trails, to not go out alone. But when I pressed them on why, they'd clam up, change the subject, suddenly remember somewhere else they needed to be. Finally, late in the afternoon, one old mountaineer opened up. I found him sitting alone in a booth at the back of a diner, nursing a cup of coffee and reading a newspaper. He must have been in his 70s, with a weathered face covered in deep lines that spoke of decades spent outdoors. His hands were rough as tree bark, knuckles swollen with arthritis. I asked if I could join him, and he gestured at the empty seat across from him. For a while, we just made small talk. The weather, the town, how long he'd lived there. I didn't rush him. Sometimes in this business, you have to let people come to the point in their own time. Eventually, I mentioned why I was in town, looking for the missing hiker. He nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting this. Then he started talking, his voice low so the waitress behind the counter couldn't hear. He told me he'd heard strange howls at night when he was up in the mountains. Unlike any animal he'd ever known, and he'd been hiking those mountains for 50 years. Deep sounds, almost like speech, but not quite. Sounds that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He'd heard them multiple times over the years, always from deep in the forest, always at night. He mentioned finding trees broken at impossible heights. 10, 12 feet up, thick branches snapped clean in half like toothpicks. Not storm damage. He knew what storm damage looked like. This was different, like something massive had grabbed the trees and broken them deliberately, marking territory maybe. He'd found these broken trees in clusters, forming paths through the forest. Another hiker came into the diner while we were talking. A younger guy, maybe 30, with the lean build of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. The old mountaineer waved him over, introduced him to me. This second hiker had his own story. He'd seen something massive moving through the forest at dusk 3 weeks earlier. Something that walked on 2 legs, but was way too big to be human. At least 8 feet tall, he estimated, maybe more, covered in dark fur. He'd been hiking back to his car, about a mile from the trailhead, when he spotted it moving parallel to the trail, just glimpses through the trees, but enough to know it wasn't a bears don't walk upright for long distances. This thing moved like a person, with long strides and a purposeful gait. He'd quickened his pace to get back to his car and hadn't been back to those mountains since. These people seemed genuinely frightened, not making up stories for attention or to scare an outsider. I could see it in their eyes, hear it in the way their voices dropped when they talked about what they'd experienced. Whatever was out there, they believed in it completely. And that made me nervous in a way I hadn't expected. Before I left the diner, the old mountaineer grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. He looked me dead in the eye and said something I'll never forget. He told me that some of the old-timers in town, the people who'd lived there for generations, had their own name for whatever was in those mountains. They called it the Guardian. Said it had always been there, long before white settlers arrived. The local tribe used to leave offerings at the edge of the forest, gave it respect and distance. He said the disappearances only started when people stopped respecting the boundaries, when hikers started pushing deeper into the wilderness, climbing the remote peaks, camping in areas that used to be considered forbidden. I thanked him for his time and left the diner with a lot to think about. The next morning I woke before dawn. I'd barely slept, kept waking from dreams I couldn't quite remember, but that left me feeling uneasy. I grabbed breakfast at a gas station, bad coffee and a stale donut, then loaded my gear into my truck and drove to the trailhead. The parking area was empty when I arrived just after sunrise. A weathered wooden sign marked the trail entrance, listing distances to various landmarks. The missing person's car had been found here 2 weeks ago, towed away by police after the initial search efforts. I stood there for a moment, looking at the dark tree line, trying to steel my nerves. The forest felt wrong from the moment I stepped onto the trail. I couldn't put my finger on why at first. It was quiet, too quiet. No birds singing in the trees, no squirrels chattering, not even the buzz of insects. Just silence and the sound of my own boots crunching on frozen ground with each step. I followed the marked trail for several miles, my backpack heavy with supplies for 2 days of searching. The police report said the missing person had planned to hike to a remote lake about 8 miles in, camp there overnight, then return. But his GPS watch data showed he'd gone off-trail about 5 miles in, heading northwest into less traveled terrain. The trail wound through dense forest of Douglas fir and western red cedar. Massive trees that had been growing for centuries, their trunks wider than I could wrap my arms around. Thick undergrowth filled the spaces between trees, making it impossible to see more than 20 or 30 feet in any direction. The canopy overhead blocked out most of the sunlight, leaving the forest floor in perpetual twilight. Around midday, I reached the point where his GPS track left the main trail. I found a clearing about 50 yards off the trail and set up a base camp. Just a simple setup, my tent, sleeping bag, cooking supplies. I'd use this as a central point and search in expanding circles from here. The first afternoon of searching yielded nothing. I covered maybe 3 square miles, working methodically in a grid pattern, marking my progress on a GPS unit. I found no gear, no signs of struggle, no footprints. It was frustrating and eerie at the same time. The missing person should have left some trace of his passage through here. Disturbed undergrowth, broken branches, something. but there was nothing. As evening approached and the light started to fade, I headed back to base camp. I was maybe half a mile away when I heard it. A sound like wood cracking, sharp and loud in the quiet forest. I stopped immediately, every sense on alert. I waited, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. Definitely wood breaking, but it didn't sound like a falling branch. It sounded deliberate, controlled. I called out, asked if anyone was there. My voice sounded small and weak in the vast silence of the forest. No response. Just that oppressive quiet again, I continued back to camp, walking faster now, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. That night was one of the longest of my life. I lay in my sleeping bag inside the tent, listening to every sound. The forest came alive after dark in ways I hadn't anticipated, branches creaking in the wind, small animals rustling through undergrowth, and footsteps, or what sounded like footsteps, heavy, measured, circling my camp. Several times I unzipped the tent to check, shining my flashlight into the darkness. The beam would sweep across trees and bushes, illuminating nothing but shadows. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the reach of the light, watching me, studying me. Once, around 2 a.m, I heard something brush against the side of the tent. The nylon fabric rustled, pressed inward slightly, then released. My heart hammered in my chest. I grabbed the pepper spray from next to my sleeping bag, held it ready, barely breathing. Whatever it was moved around to the other side of the tent. I could track its movement by the sound. Then, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two, it moved away. I heard heavy footsteps receding into the forest. I didn't sleep after that, just lay there in the darkness, listening, every muscle tense, waiting for dawn. I woke early the next morning with first light filtering through the tent fabric. My body ached from tension and lack of sleep. I forced myself to eat something, trail mix and an energy bar, then packed up my day pack with water, snacks, and emergency supplies. I left the tent and most of my gear at base camp and headed northwest, the direction the missing person's GPS data indicated he'd gone. About 2 miles from camp, pushing through dense undergrowth that tore at my clothes and scratched my hands, I found the first piece of evidence. A torn piece of a backpack strap caught on a thorn bush, fluttering slightly in the breeze like a little flag. I pulled it free carefully, examined it, black nylon with reflective threading, about 6 inches long. The tear was fresh, or at least recent, not weather-worn. The family had described the missing person's gear to me in detail during our initial meeting. This matched his backpack exactly. My pulse quickened. This was the first real evidence that I was on the right track, that he'd come through here. I pulled out my GPS unit and marked the location, then looked around carefully, trying to determine which direction he'd been traveling. The thorn bush was bent in a way that suggested he'd brushed past it going northwest, deeper into the forest. I followed that direction, moving slowly now, eyes scanning the ground and undergrowth for more clues. A quarter-mile later, I found a water bottle half buried in leaves. I crouched down and picked it up. Stainless steel with a blue cap and scratches on the side from heavy use. The family had mentioned this specifically. They'd given it to him for his birthday 2 years ago. Seeing it here, discarded or lost in the middle of nowhere, made the situation feel suddenly more real, more urgent. The trail of clues was leading deeper into the wilderness, away from any established paths or landmarks. The terrain was getting rougher too, steeper slopes, more rocks, denser vegetation. This wasn't the kind of terrain anyone would choose to hike through unless they were running from something or chasing something. Near a rocky outcrop where granite boulders the size of cars had tumbled down from the mountain above, I discovered a broken carabiner lying in a patch of moss. I picked it up and examined it closely. The metal was twisted, bent out of shape like it had been put under tremendous pressure. Not gradually. You could see from the metal's crystalline structure that it had failed suddenly, catastrophically. The kind of damage you'd see in climbing accidents, but there were no cliffs here to climb, no reason for him to have been using climbing gear in this spot. I turned the broken carabiner over in my hands, trying to make sense of it. Had he been climbing and fallen? But there was no cliff nearby. Had something pulled on his gear with enough force to break solid steel? These items seemed scattered along a rough path, like someone had been running or fleeing. The evidence told a story of panic, of flight, but flight from what? As I pushed deeper into the forest, following this trail of dropped and torn gear, I started noticing other strange signs. Trees with bark stripped off about 8 feet up. I stopped at the first one, ran my hand over the exposed wood underneath. The stripping pattern didn't match any animal I knew. Not deer, not elk, not bears sometimes strip bark from trees, but they do it from the bottom up, and they leave claw marks. This was different. It looked almost like something had grabbed the tree with both hands and peeled the bark away in long strips. The exposed wood showed what might have been finger marks, 4 or 5 parallel gouges. I measured them with my hand. The span was huge, much larger than a human hand. Whatever made these marks had fingers like tree branches. I found more trees like this as I continued, forming a rough path through the woods. They appeared every 100 yards or so, all stripped at the same height, all with the same pattern like markers or territorial boundaries. The thought made my skin crawl. Then I came across something that made me stop dead in my tracks and seriously consider turning around. A shelter, or what looked like a nest. It was massive, built between 3 large Douglas firs, their trunks forming a natural triangle. Branches had been bent and woven together to create a roof and walls. The construction deliberate and skillful despite using only natural materials. The structure was at least 8 feet tall and maybe 10 feet across, big enough for something very large to shelter inside. The branches used in the construction were thick, 2 or 3 inches in diameter. And they'd been bent without breaking, woven together in an interlocking pattern that spoke of intelligence and purpose. This wasn't some random pile of debris, this was built. I approached cautiously, every sense on high alert, one hand on the pepper spray in my pocket. Inside the structure, I found what might have been bedding. Dried grass and leaves had been piled thick on the ground, arranged in a circular pattern, compressed in the middle, like something large and heavy had been lying there. The depression in the bedding was enormous, at least 6 feet across. A terrible smell hung in the air around the structure, like wet dog mixed with something rotten, something dead. The stench was so strong it made my eyes water. I covered my nose and mouth with my sleeve, trying not to gag. I'd smelled decomposition before in my work, had come across bodies in various states of decay. This was similar but different, more animal, more primal. It triggered something deep in my brain, some ancient prey response that screamed at me to run. Something large was living here. Something that built shelters and bedded down for the night. Something that marked territory by stripping bark from trees. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe a bear, maybe a disturbed person living wild in the woods. But I knew better. This wasn't made by a bear, and no human could bend those thick branches the way they'd been bent. I should have left right then, should have marked the location and called it in to the police. Let them send a proper search team with weapons and backup. But I'd come this far, found this much. I wanted answers, needed them. So I pushed forward, even though every instinct was telling me to turn back. While examining the shelter, circling around it slowly, I noticed impressions in the soft earth nearby. At first, I thought they might be from deer or elk. The ground here was muddy, perfect for holding tracks. But when I crouched down to look closer, my breath caught in my throat. Footprints, human-shaped footprints, but massive. Each print was easily 18 inches long, maybe 7 or 8 inches wide. They sank deep into the mud. Whatever made them was heavy, very heavy. The prints were shaped like human feet, but proportioned all wrong. Too large, too wide. 5 distinct toe marks pressed into the mud, each one clearly visible. A clear heel impression at the back. An arch in the middle that showed this thing had flexible feet that distributed weight like a person's. These were definitely not bear tracks. I'd seen plenty of bear tracks in my time, both black bear and grizzly. Bears have claw marks extending from their toes, sometimes an inch or more beyond the toe pads. These prints had no claws. The toes were rounded, blunt, like human toes. And bears don't leave heel prints like this. When bears walk, they step more on the front of their paws, not heel to toe like humans. I pulled out my phone and took several photos of the clearest prints, placing my own boot next to them for scale. My boot looked like a child's shoe. By comparison, I measured the stride length between prints using a collapsible measuring tape from my pack. Over 6 feet. Whatever made these tracks was huge and walked upright on 2 legs, covering ground with massive strides. I counted at least a dozen clear prints leading away from the shelter, heading downhill toward what I could hear was running water somewhere below. The prints were recent. No rain had fallen to blur them, no leaves had accumulated in them. Within the last few days, maybe within the last few hours. My hand went to the pepper spray in my pocket, checking for maybe the 10th time that it was still there, that it was ready. Pepper spray suddenly seemed like an absurdly inadequate defense against whatever had made these tracks, but it was all I had. I hadn't brought a gun, didn't own one actually, and now I was regretting that fact intensely. I should have turned back right then. Every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to get out of there, to retreat to base camp, to call the authorities. But I'd come this far. I'd found the missing person's gear, found this impossible shelter, found these inexplicable footprints. I was close to answers, close to understanding what happened, so I followed the tracks, moving as quietly as I could, every sense on high alert, jumping at every sound. The footprints led downhill through increasingly dense vegetation, following what seemed to be an animal trail, or something's trail. After about a quarter mile of careful tracking, the ground suddenly dropped away. I found myself at the edge of a steep ravine, maybe 40 feet deep, with a small creek running through the bottom. I was about to work my way along the edge, looking for an easier descent, when I caught a glint of something metallic at the bottom of the ravine, partially hidden by ferns growing along the creek bed. Something that didn't belong in nature, something man-made. I carefully climbed down, grabbing onto exposed tree roots and rocks to keep from falling. The slope was steeper than it looked, and loose dirt kept sliding away under my boots. By the time I reached the bottom, my hands were scraped and filthy, my jacket torn in 2 places from catching on branches. I pushed through the ferns and found it. A selfie stick, the telescoping kind that extends to about 3 feet long. It was lying in the shallow water of the creek, partially submerged. A phone was still attached to it, held in place by a spring-loaded mount. The phone was in a waterproof case, one of those heavy-duty ones meant for extreme sports and outdoor activities. The screen was cracked in a spiderweb pattern that radiated from the upper right corner. The case was scuffed and dented. But when I picked it up, water streaming from it, and pressed the power button, the screen flickered to life. The battery icon showed about 20% charge remaining. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely navigate the phone's interface. I sat down on a fallen log, took a few deep breaths to steady myself. The phone wasn't password protected. The face recognition must have been disabled, or maybe the cracked screen prevented it from working. The home screen showed several dozen notification badges, missed calls from contacts labeled Mom and Dad, text messages in double digits, voicemails, all trying to reach someone who would never respond. I navigated to the photo gallery, my thumb leaving muddy smears on the cracked screen. Dozens of photos loaded, thumbnails appearing row by row. I saw selfies of the missing person against mountain backgrounds, his grinning face and the vast wilderness behind him. Photos of campsites, carefully composed shots of sunrises and sunsets, wildlife shots, a deer, an eagle, a marmot. Then photos of him with people I assumed were his family, a smiling woman who must have been his mother, an older man with the same eyes, his father, a younger woman, maybe his sister, all of them happy, unaware that the person taking these photos would soon be gone. The most recent photos showed he'd been having a good trip. Beautiful scenery, good weather, everything going according to plan. Then I reached the videos folder. I navigated to the video folder with a growing sense of dread. There were maybe a dozen videos, mostly short clips, panoramic views of mountains, a time lapse of clouds moving across the sky, him talking to the camera about his trip, giving updates like he was making a travel vlog. The most recent video was dated 3 days before the family reported him missing. The file was large and over 5 minutes of footage. I found a relatively dry spot on the fallen log, sat down properly, and pressed play. The volume was low, so I turned it up, then immediately regretted it when his voice came through the tinny speaker. The video started mid-hike. The missing person was filming himself as he walked, the camera bouncing slightly with each step. He was talking excitedly, his voice high with adrenaline and barely suppressed glee. He kept saying he'd spotted something incredible up ahead, something he'd been hoping to see his whole life, something that was going to make him famous. He was being cagey about what exactly he'd seen, saying he didn't want to jinx it, wanted to get it on camera first before he said anything definitive. But his excitement was obvious. He kept stopping to catch his breath, not from exertion but from pure adrenaline. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. This was going to change everything. The camera swung around. In the background, maybe 50 or 60 yards away, partially obscured by a cluster of pine trees, I saw a massive, dark shape. At first, it was hard to make out, just a darker shadow among shadows. But as the missing person stabilized the camera, zoomed in slightly, the shape became clearer. It was standing upright on 2 legs behind the trees, massive shoulders hunched forward. The shape was clearly huge, at least 8 or 9 feet tall, maybe more broad across the chest and shoulders in a way no human could be. Covered in dark hair that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It was just standing there, motionless, facing toward the camera, watching. The missing person's voice on the video was shaking now, but not with fear, with excitement. He was narrating what he was seeing, describing it for the camera. He kept saying this was unbelievable, this was impossible, this was the discovery of a lifetime. He was going to get closer, he said, going to get a better shot, going to get close enough for a good selfie with it in the background. I wanted to scream at the screen to warn him. But of course, it was too late. This had already happened. This had happened weeks ago, and I was just watching the recording of events that were long finished. The camera work got shakier as he moved forward, trying to get closer while still filming. He was talking to himself, muttering about angles and lighting, about how he needed to position himself to get both his face and the creature in frame. He was treating it like a photo opportunity, like this was something safe and wonderful instead of dangerous. The creature, Bigfoot, I had to admit that's what it was, hadn't moved yet. It just stood there, watching him approach, waiting. I could see more details now as he got closer and the camera focused better. Massive arms that hung almost to its knees, a head that seemed to sit directly on the shoulders with almost no neck, features that were hard to make out but appeared almost human, just scaled up and more primitive. He was maybe 30 yards away now, positioning the selfie stick to get both himself and the Bigfoot in frame. He was grinning, actually grinning, saying this was the greatest moment of his life. This was dash, dash, dash. The creature moved fast, faster than anything that size had any right to move. One moment it was standing still. The next it was charging forward through the trees, covering ground in huge strides. The missing person's excited voice changed instantly to panic, to terror. He realized his mistake in that split second, understood that he'd misread the situation completely. He started running, still holding the selfie stick and phone out in front of him. The camera bounced wildly, showing flashes of trees, ground, sky, all jumbled together. His breathing was ragged, gasping. I could hear his footsteps pounding on the forest floor, hear branches snapping as he crashed through underbrush. Behind him in the recording, I could hear the creature in pursuit. Heavy footsteps, much heavier than his, getting closer, thunder on the forest floor. The sound of massive weight moving at speed, unstoppable and relentless. It was gaining on him with every second, closing the distance despite his panicked flight. He was gasping now, trying to run and keep filming at the same time. Why was he still filming? Why not drop the phone and use both hands to run faster, to grab trees and help pull himself forward? But people do strange things in panic, hold on to objects that don't matter, make illogical decisions. Then, in the frame, I saw it. A massive hand reaching in from the right side of the screen. Dark hair covered it, thick and matted. The fingers looked like tree branches, thick and powerful, tipped with what might have been nails or small claws. The hand was huge, the palm easily twice the size of a human hand. The phone dropped. The camera tumbled through the air for a moment, then hit the ground at an angle. It showed ground and leaves, the frame tilted and partially blocked, but it was still recording. The microphone was still picking up sound. I heard screaming, terrible screaming that started high and panic-stricken and then cut off suddenly, abruptly. Then came the sounds of something being dragged through the underbrush, leaves rustling, branches snapping, heavy breathing that definitely wasn't human. Deep and rhythmic and utterly alien. The phone lay there recording for another 2 minutes. Sometimes I could hear the sounds of the Bigfoot moving around somewhere nearby. Sometimes there was just silence and the ambient sounds of the forest birds had started singing again, like whatever terrible thing had just happened was already being forgotten by nature, absorbed back into the endless cycle of predator and prey. Finally, the video ended. The screen went black. I sat there on the log staring at the dark screen, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone into the creek. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. I stumbled backward off the log, my mind trying to reject what I'd just seen, but I couldn't deny it. The video was right there. The evidence was undeniable. I checked my watch. It was already late afternoon, almost 4 o'clock. The sun was starting to sink behind the mountains. I had planned to camp another night in the forest and continue searching at dawn. But now all I wanted was to get out of these mountains, get back to civilization, get somewhere with locked doors and electric lights. The nearest trailhead was at least 4 miles away. The sun would set in less than 2 hours. I made the decision quickly. Pack up, hike out, move fast. I half ran back to my base camp, my boots slipping on loose rocks and wet leaves. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I reached camp, I threw gear into my backpack without organizing it. Sleeping bag stuffed in loose, cooking gear clanging around. I didn't care about being neat, I just needed to move. I kept looking over my shoulder as I packed. The forest seemed darker now, more menacing. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every tree could be hiding something massive. I started hiking quickly back toward the marked trail. In my haste, I took a wrong turn, following what I thought was the path, but turned out to be a game trail that led nowhere. I had to backtrack, wasting precious minutes. The sun was sinking fast, and long shadows stretched between the trees like grasping fingers. I'd been hiking hard for 30 minutes when I heard it, a sound like branches breaking, coming from somewhere behind me. I stopped to listen, holding my breath. Silence for a moment, just the wind in the trees and my own pulse hammering in my ears. Then I heard it again, closer this time. Something large was moving through the forest parallel to my path, staying just out of sight. I picked up my pace, trying not to break into a panicked run. I knew from nature documentaries that running triggers predator instincts in animals. But this was no ordinary animal. This was something that had killed before. The sounds continued as I walked, sometimes close, sometimes distant. Whatever it was seemed to be pacing me, matching my speed, staying just beyond my field of vision. I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, something dark shifting between the trees. But every time I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. The forest was getting darker by the minute. Twilight was settling in, that gray period between day and night when everything becomes uncertain. I pulled out my flashlight but hesitated to turn it on. I didn't want to make myself more visible, but I also couldn't see the trail clearly anymore. Tree roots seemed to reach up and grab my feet. Darkness came fast in the mountains. One moment there was light, and the next moment I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I finally had to turn on my flashlight to navigate. The beam seemed pathetically small against the vast darkness of the forest. It lit up maybe 10 feet ahead of me, leaving everything else in shadow. I estimated I was still about 2 miles from my truck, 2 miles through dark woods with something following me. Then I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. A howl, long and deep and guttural. Not a wolf or coyote, something deeper, more primal. The howl echoed through the trees and seemed to come from everywhere at once. My pace increased to a jog. My backpack bounced against my shoulders with each step. My breath came in quick gasps that misted in the cold air. I rounded a bend in the trail and stopped dead. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw something massive standing on the path ahead. A dark shape, easily 8 or 9 feet tall. It stood on 2 legs like a man but hunched forward, powerful shoulders rolling with muscle beneath dark fur. The creature was covered in hair that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Its eyes reflected back at me. Yellow-green, like a cat's eyes caught in headlights. For a frozen moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we stared at each other. I could see the massive chest rising and falling with each breath. I could see individual fingers on its hands, each one thick as a broomstick. The Bigfoot made a sound, a low rumble, almost like speech, but not quite. Like it was trying to communicate or warning me. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes locked on it, not daring to look away. My hand fumbled for the pepper spray in my pocket. The creature took a step forward, then another. It was testing me, seeing if I would run. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn and sprint, but I forced myself to keep backing up slowly. Then pure panic took over. I turned and sprinted off the trail into the forest. I knew this was a mistake even as I was doing it, but I couldn't help myself. Fear had hijacked my brain. I crashed through underbrush, branches whipping my face and tearing at my jacket. Behind me, I heard the Bigfoot give chase. The sound of its footfalls was terrifying heavy, fast, relentless. It wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. It smashed through obstacles that slowed me down like they weren't even there, gaining on me with every second. My lungs burned like they were filled with acid. My legs ached, muscles screaming in protest with every step. But I couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. I kept running blindly through the dark forest, branches materializing out of the darkness to slam into my chest and face. I'd lost my flashlight somewhere in the first few seconds of the chase. Dropped it when I started running. Now I was navigating by moonlight alone, barely able to see more than a few feet ahead. Tree trunks loomed up suddenly from the darkness. I'd dodge at the last second, feeling bark scrape against my shoulder or arm. Low-hanging branches caught me across the face and chest, leaving stinging welts. I didn't care. The pain didn't matter. All that mattered was distance, was getting away from the thing pursuing me. I tripped over a root I didn't see and went sprawling. The fall knocked the air from my lungs for the second time that night. I hit hard, felt pain shoot through my shoulder and ribs. For a moment, I just lay there gasping, trying to force my lungs to work again. Then survival instinct kicked in. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain, expecting any second to feel those massive hands grab me from behind. The Bigfoot was close, too close. I could hear its breathing now, a deep rumbling sound that vibrated in my chest like standing next to a large diesel engine. I could smell it too, that terrible wet dog and rot smell I'd noticed at the shelter, but stronger now, overwhelming. It filled my nose and mouth with every gasping breath. Ahead, I saw a dense thicket of thorny bushes, the branches woven together into an almost impenetrable barrier. I had no choice. I dove into it, ignoring the thorns that immediately started tearing at my clothes and exposed skin. The pain was sharp and immediate, like being attacked by 1,000 tiny knives all at once. Thorns caught my jacket, my pants, my hands and face. I felt blood trickling down my cheeks from scratches, but I pushed through anyway, forcing my way deeper into the thicket. Maybe it would slow the Bigfoot down, give me some distance. Maybe it would. Behind me, the creature crashed into the thicket. I heard the sound of branches snapping, tearing. It was following me through. The thorns that shredded my jacket and skin like tissue paper seemed to mean nothing to it. It smashed through the barrier like it wasn't even there, its size and strength simply overwhelming the obstacles that slowed me to a crawl. I broke free from the far side of the thicket, bleeding and gasping, my clothes hanging in tatters. I kept running, not daring to look back, knowing the Bigfoot was right behind me. So close I could hear every footfall, could feel the ground shake slightly with each of its massive steps. Suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I realized too late that I'd reached another ravine, steeper and deeper than the one where I'd found the phone. There was no time to stop, no time to redirect. My momentum carried me over the edge, and I was falling, sliding down the steep embankment in an uncontrolled tumble. I grabbed desperately at roots and rocks, trying to slow my fall. My fingers closed on a root, and I felt it rip free from the soil. I grabbed at another, felt the skin on my palm tear open as it slid through my grip. I was tumbling now, bouncing down the slope, hitting rocks and roots, unable to control my descent at all. My head hit something hard, a rock or a tree trunk. I couldn't tell which. Stars exploded across my vision. The world spun and tilted sickeningly. I kept falling, rolling, until finally I hit the bottom with an impact that drove all the air from my lungs and sent a spike of pain through my entire body. I lay there at the bottom of the ravine, gasping like a fish out of water, trying to fill my lungs. Every part of my body screamed in pain. My ribs felt bruised or cracked. My head throbbed where I'd hit it. Blood ran into my left eye from a cut on my forehead. My hands were torn and bleeding. Above me, silhouetted against the night sky at the top of the ravine, I saw the Bigfoot. Its massive shape was unmistakable, completely blocking out the stars behind it. It stood there for a moment, looking down at me. I could see its chest heaving with each breath, could see the outline of its enormous head turning slightly as it studied me. For a desperate moment, I thought maybe it would give up. Maybe the ravine was too steep. Maybe I'd finally put enough distance between us. Then it started climbing down, moving with a confidence and agility that should have been impossible for something so large. It descended the steep slope like it was nothing. Where I had fallen and tumbled out of control, it moved with purpose and grace, finding handholds in the darkness that I couldn't even see. Terror gave me strength I didn't know I had. I forced myself to my feet despite the pain, despite the dizziness from hitting my head. I stumbled away from the Bigfoot, deeper into the ravine, following the sound of rushing water that had to mean a river or stream. Behind me, I could hear it still descending, getting closer with every second. I heard rushing water ahead. I broke through the tree line and found myself at a river. The water was fast, churning white with rapids. Across the river, maybe 50 feet away, I could see lights. The parking area, civilization, safety. The Bigfoot emerged from the trees behind me. I could hear it breathing, could hear the crunch of its feet on gravel. There's no time to think, no time to plan. I plunged into the freezing water. The current immediately swept me downstream. The water was shockingly cold, so cold it took my breath away. I tried to swim, but the current was too strong. It pulled me along like I weighed nothing. Rocks battered my legs and arms as I tumbled through the rapids. I went under, swallowed water, surfaced, gasping and choking. Through the spray and darkness, I saw the Bigfoot on the shore. It was pacing alongside me, keeping up easily. But it wasn't following into the water. The creature howled. The sound was filled with rage and frustration. It took a few steps into the shallow water at the river's edge, then stopped. It seemed unwilling to cross the deep, fast-moving water. I managed to angle myself toward the far shore, fighting the current with everything I had. My numb fingers grabbed onto a rock jutting from the water. I pulled myself partially out, gasping for air. I looked back across the river. The Bigfoot was still on the opposite shore, watching me. Then it turned and disappeared into the darkness of the forest. My grip on the rock slipped. The current pulled me under again. I tumbled through the rapids, completely disoriented. I didn't know which way was up. I slammed into a submerged log and managed to grab on with both arms. Slowly, painfully, I pulled myself onto the log. From there, I half crawled, half swam to the shore. I collapsed on the muddy bank, coughing up water. Every part of my body ached. I was soaking wet in near freezing temperatures, shivering so violently my teeth rattled. I looked back across the river and saw nothing but darkness. The Bigfoot was gone, or at least out of sight. I knew I had to keep moving or die of hypothermia. I forced myself to stand on shaking legs. The parking area lights were visible through the trees. Maybe a quarter mile away, I stumbled toward them, falling several times. Each time it was harder to get back up. My body wanted to just lie down and rest. Hypothermia was setting in. My thinking became fuzzy, disconnected. I couldn't remember why I was walking. Then I'd see the lights and remember, keep moving. Get to the truck. Get warm. Finally, I broke through the tree line into the parking lot. I saw my truck sitting there under a streetlight. I have never been so happy to see a vehicle in my entire life. I fumbled for my keys with numb fingers. I dropped them twice before I managed to get the door open. I climbed inside and locked all the doors, every single one. I sat there shaking violently, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they might crack. I started the engine and cranked the heat to maximum. Hot air poured from the vents. I knew I should drive away immediately, get far from this place. But I needed a minute to recover, to process what had just happened. I looked out at the dark tree line surrounding the parking lot. I saw nothing. But I knew something was out there. Watching from the shadows, I could feel its eyes on me. As warmth slowly returned to my body, my mind started working again. The phone with the footage was still back in the ravine where I'd dropped it. The only evidence of what really happened to the missing person. The only proof of what I'd seen. I knew I should go back for it. The family deserved to know the truth. But there was no way I was going back into those woods. Not tonight, not ever. Whatever was out there had killed once and would kill again. The family had hired me to find answers, and I'd found them, just not answers anyone would believe. I sat in the truck until first light started to break. I watched the forest emerge from darkness as the sun rose. In daylight, it looked almost normal. Almost peaceful, trees and rocks and morning mist. Hard to believe the terror of the previous night. I made a decision. I would call the police. I would tell them about the missing person's gear I'd found. I would give them coordinates and let them search. But I wouldn't mention what I'd seen, wouldn't talk about the footage or the Bigfoot. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, that I was making it up. I drove back to town and checked into my motel. I took a long, hot shower and treated my cuts and bruises. Then I called the family and asked to meet them. We sat across from each other in a small cafe. The mother and father looked exhausted, like they hadn't slept in weeks. I could see the hope in their eyes when they looked at me. It made me feel sick. I told them I'd found evidence their son had gone off trail. I said I'd found some of his gear scattered in the wilderness. I gave them the location and suggested they push the police to search that specific area. I kept my voice steady and professional. The mother asked me the question I'd been dreading, gear. Did I think their son had suffered? I looked into her eyes and lied. I told her it probably happened quickly. I didn't mention the phone or the footage or the truth about what killed him. I took my payment and left. I've never felt worse about taking money in my life. Over the next week, the police searched the area I'd indicated. They found more of the missing person's gear scattered through the forest. Eventually, they found scattered remains, bones, scraps of clothing. Not much left after weeks in the wilderness with scavengers. The death was officially ruled an animal attack. Probably a bear, the report said. The family finally got their closure. They held a funeral I attended, standing in the back, paying my respects. I felt guilty for not telling them everything. But I also knew the truth would only cause more pain. How do you tell parents that their son died because he wanted a selfie with a creature that shouldn't exist? Months later, I still think about that night constantly. I have nightmares about being chased through dark forests. I wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. I can still see those yellow-green eyes staring at me in the darkness. I started researching Bigfoot sightings in the Pacific Northwest. There are dozens of similar stories, hundreds maybe. Hikers who vanished without a trace. Strange evidence that doesn't make sense. Cases that went cold. I wonder how many missing persons cases are really something else. How many families are told their loved ones died in animal attacks or got lost in the wilderness? when the truth is something far stranger. I've stopped taking cases in wilderness areas. I stick to cities now, urban investigations, surveillance work. Anything that keeps me away from forests and mountains. I can't bring myself to go camping anymore. Even the thought of sleeping in a tent makes my heart race. I'm telling the story now because I needed to get it out. I needed to share the burden with someone. The weight of this secret has been crushing me for months. I want to warn others to be careful in remote wilderness areas. Some places are wild for a reason. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. I went looking for answers and found something I wish I could forget. The missing person died doing what he loved, chasing thrills, pushing boundaries, seeking out the next adventure. But some thrills have consequences. Some boundaries exist for good reasons. Some creatures don't want to be filmed or approached or studied. Those mountains hold secrets that should stay buried. I learned that the hard way. I've moved to a city now. No more forests, no more mountains. I live in an apartment on the 10th floor with good locks on the doors. I keep all the windows closed at night, even in summer. I still jump at unexpected sounds, a car backfiring, a door slamming. My heart races and I'm back in those woods running for my life. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn when the city is still asleep, I swear I can hear that howl echoing from somewhere far away. Deep and guttural and filled with rage. It's just my imagination, I tell myself, just memories playing tricks on me, but deep down, I know the truth. That Bigfoot is still out there, in those mountains, still hunting, still watching, still waiting for the next person who gets too close, who pushes too far, who doesn't understand that some boundaries are meant to protect us. Some things exist whether we believe in them or not. Some encounters change you forever. I know that now. I carry that knowledge with me every day, and I'll carry it for the rest of my life. The family got their closure. The case is closed. Everyone moved on with their lives, everyone except me. Because I know what really happened in those woods. I saw it with my own eyes. And that's something I can never forget.